But the enemies are indeed developed countries, and developed countries must not feel that their standards are better than our country's standards. For this discussion, let me take a deep breath first. You may be proud because Indonesia's natural resources are being contested by the world, because the country's income automatically increases, but you definitely know that most or even almost all of our natural resources that we import are in the form of raw materials, which means their value is much lower than finished goods. Our government stopped exporting some raw materials out. They can be exported, but the raw materials are first processed into finished materials, then they can come out. You know what happened, developed countries went berserk, and you know the reason, right? Countries that import natural resources from Indonesia can no longer buy cheaply. Indonesia was even sued because of this policy. It's funny, isn't it? We have natural resources, but they are regulated by other countries. One of the things that makes developed countries angry is because of Indonesia's policy of stopping the export of raw nickel in the form of nickel ore. I think Jokowi's statement is very interesting. If we export raw materials, until the end of the world it will only be a developing country. Now it's like this. You know, what makes developed countries angry about nickel? The answer is this. Indonesia is the largest nickel-producing country in the world, with a total of 1.6 million metric tons, which even accounts for 48% of total global nickel production. The export destination countries are China, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia and Norway. Do you know the function of nickel or not? Around 300,000 industrial, military, transportation, aviation, marine and architectural products require nickel as a raw material. For existing household appliances, all the raw materials are nickel. Even nickel is now a target for the electric vehicle industry, which is now growing rapidly as a raw material for making batteries. I'll give you a little picture. The value of nickel exports in 2022 will reach IDR 514. 3 trillion. Imagine the profits for Indonesia if it was downstreamed or processed first as finished goods. You know the reason why developed countries are angry when Indonesia stops raw nickel, because there are also many industries that need nickel raw materials. And they don't want to pay a lot for Indonesian nickel. What happens? The IMF asked Indonesia to gradually remove the export ban. And don't let it spread to the international community. Indonesia also has to enter into a legal dispute with the European Union over a lawsuit against the International Trade Organization, the WTO, and according to the European Union, Indonesia violated trade rules, and as a result, Indonesia was declared defeated in the European Union's lawsuit, so Indonesia still has to export its nickel. The reason for the WTO is because the downstream industry in Indonesia is considered immature. In this case I agree again with Jokowi's statement, no country should dictate, and no developed countries should feel that their standards are better than Indonesia. No country should dictate and no developed countries should feel that their standards are better from our country's standards. The government has submitted an appeal from December 2022. But the problem is that the appeal will probably only be able to take place in 2024, because of the blockade of the election of the appeals body by the United States, which is a member of the WTO, and they still have to wait in line for the appeal process at the WTO. Maybe after Indonesian nickel if it's finished, then you can appeal to the IMF, WTO, or developed countries, for fear that Indonesia will also become a developed town. Not easily discouraged, not afraid for the sake of the nation. What is also prohibited for export is bauxite. This ban has started on June 11, 2023, so for those who don't know, what is bauxite? Bauxite is the main ore for making aluminum. The colors are pink, cream, red, brown, yellow, and gray ash. This bauxite is used as raw material for making cooking utensils and food packaging materials. All forms of food packaging, whether cans or plastic food packaging, materials for making ink, raw materials for making iron and steel, and materials for making ceramics such as nickel and bauxite, these will also be processed and refined domestically, so exports can be permitted if it has gone through the melter process. This process consists of processing it into alumina, then it will be processed again until it becomes aluminum. The considerations are, firstly, to increase the added value of the domestic economy, secondly to increase the creation of new jobs, then thirdly to increase the country's foreign exchange, and fourthly, even economic growth. The potential is quite large, because if we talk about existing supplies in Indonesia, there are around 21 tons. Indonesia is even in 5th place in the world. The regions that have large bauxite supplies are in West Kalimantan at 77%. Then in Riau, Bangka Belitung and North Sumatra, we export bauxite at number 3 in the world, and China is the only destination country for Indonesian bauxite exports since 2017, but exports of bauxite made into aluminium, we are at number 33. Continuously when it comes to processing solar panels, Indonesia is only at number 31, while China's exports of boxes are at number 18, but its solar panel exports are number 1 in the world. Where do the raw materials come from? 80% of them come from Indonesia. So the government's target is by banning bauxite exports, the state's income will increase from previously only 21 trillion to around IDR 62 trillion, but the consequences, just waiting for a lawsuit from China at the WTO. Continued, this natural resource is not very popular but is called a treasure by the world. Its name is rare earth metal, or rare earth. This is a mineral that is part of the nickel or tin commodity, which is magnetic and conductive in tin, for example monazite, antimony, and zircon. In Indonesia, several potential areas for this metal are in Bangka Belitung, Sulawesi, and Halmahera, with an estimate of 8 locations, and the most abundant is in the Bangka Belitung Islands province in tin mining. The potential is hundreds of thousands of tons. The potential for rare earth metals is now a country that China is again interested in this metal, but the problem is that Chinese companies refuse to cooperate. China actually wants to buy Indonesian rare earth minerals directly, even wanting them all if no other country wants to buy them. Now what makes it strange is that China produces 61% of rare earth metals or around 168,000 tons plus China's reserves, which are estimated to be around 44 million tons. America alone has an annual production of only 1.8 million tons, or around 15.5% of China's production. Why does China want to import more from Indonesia? It turns out that this metal is indeed a treasure that has not been widely seen, but is widely used in electronic devices, in cell phones, in tablets, speakers. Then this rare earth metal is also used in the health, automotive, aviation, to the defense industry, such as for making anti-radar jets. If this metal is processed into finished goods, the economic potential is higher than selling it as raw materials, yes, but right now Indonesia doesn't have the technology to process minerals, only China and Japan can process it, and the problem is that China is also reluctant to transfer it. Management of rare earth metals to Indonesia. There is another thing that is also being targeted by Indonesia, namely coal. The Indonesian government has officially banned all coal companies from exporting at the beginning of 2022, because the supply of coal for domestic power plants in particular is critical for PLN, but that only lasts 1 month or even 11 today. The pretext is that the crisis has been under control, but there is a big assumption that there is pressure from other countries, and that is true. There are 3 countries that are protesting the policy of banning Indonesian coal exports, such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. This is because these 3 countries really depend on it. Coal troops from Indonesia. Indonesia itself is the 3rd largest coal producer in the world, and the largest supplies are in East Kalimantan and South Sumatra. The supply in China and India is greater than Indonesia's, but I want to know, in fact, Indonesia's coal contribution in China is 70% to 80%, while India's 45% to 50%. It's strange, isn't it? Indonesia actually exports its coal to countries that have the largest coal supply in the world, knowing what the cause is. Coal entrepreneurs are tempted by the mechanism market and the promise of bigger profits than selling it to PLN. Just pay the penalty and it can still be covered at a high price. Yes. So it's natural that our country is experiencing a coal crisis.